But Les Cancurla, Taoiseach, first of all, I think we all need to acknowledge the work that was done by the emergency services in Wexford yesterday evening. But to the other part of the country, I'm going, the CHO2 area, and I'm specifically dealing with Roscommon, Taoiseach, where we have been inundated over the last 8 to 10 months by parents of children from 3 years of age to 15, 16 years of age in relation to services under CAMS, ADHD, children with autism, where the whole system seems to be in disarray. We have a child of 3.5 that had a blood test that had to be sent to England to basically see could they diagnose what was wrong. And 10 months later, and you're aware of it, Minister, because letters have gone, questions have gone to you over the last 6 to 8 months. 10 months later, those parents have never got a reply or a result. We have children that, first of all, haven't been assessed, no care plan put in place, and we have a lot of children, no OT services, no speech and language. And the reply we get when we write to you, Minister, that you will send it to the HSE. Then we wait for a few more weeks and we get this lovely letter back due to staff shortages. Under our Constitution, and you have said it earlier to Deputy McGrath, you've talked about embracing the UN Convention and treating all people the same. With the way these children are being placed, families are now being put in a situation which they don't want, may have to go to the courts to get what their children rightly deserve. And I don't care whether there's a shortage or not in the HSE. The HSE needs to make decisions that if there's private people out there, those families should be told that their children, whatever services is required, would be paid for privately if that's required. And we are going round in circles the last 6 to 8 months with parents getting frustrated. And when I talk about frustrated, I've had parents crying on phones, desperate to get services that they are not getting. In Roscommon area, it appears to be in total chaos. And the letters we get back is constantly staff shortages, retention of staff. But funnily enough, if you had enough money in your pocket, you can still get these people depending on your income. And I would ask you, Taoiseach, will you look at those cases? Will you talk to your minister beside you? And will you make sure that the children in County Roscommon is treated the same as any other children right around this country? Thank you.
Taoiseach.
Well, I thank the Deputy for raising a range of issues, but under the umbrella of CAMS and the availability of therapies and disabilities. I would say that perhaps if you can send me details of the individual child that you said had to have. No, on this one, I think that there's a very specific assertion has been made, which I think would certainly cause me great concern, that a child had to have a blood test sent to England. Now, it could be for very specific reasons that our labs wouldn't pick up the particular condition, I presume, but that no one has contacted the family for 10 months after the blood test being sent now. We have primary care services, that shouldn't happen, so we need to get to the bottom of that, Deputy, fairly quickly. And if you could send me the details of that particular case in particular, because it's been said, and I think that calls for clarity and a response. The other main point I would say in respect of children accessing therapies, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe longer, the progressing disability model was adopted. Because of circumstances, it didn't get the resources in the early years. Resources have started flowing somewhat. There's been considerable disagreement around that progressing disability model, and I've had considerable engagement with the HSE, particularly last year in my capacity as Taoiseach. I would have convened a series of meetings with health, education, special education minister in particular, around the need for children to access therapies far more quickly than is the case. Now, in some areas it's working, in other areas not so much. We've asked that in the context of special schools, and this was agreed, that those therapists that were lost to special schools would be restored on a phased basis. And again, that needs to happen more quickly than and more in line with the dates that had been agreed with the HSE on that. More fundamentally, and I think that is a key issue, the access to therapies, and there is a problem with recruitment and retention of therapists in the children area, paediatrics, and also in child services. And there's catching up to be done. Other sectors of the health service seem to be recruiting therapists more easily than in the child disability area, and that's something I've observed, but that's not satisfactory either. We have to get to the bottom of why that is the case. More fundamentally, the responsibility for disability has now transferred from health more generally, from a policy perspective, and obviously to the Department of Children. And Minister of State Anne Rabbitte is now at the Department of Children, but obviously there has to be there have been strong memorandum of understandings drawn up and agreements between the HSE and the Department of Children in terms of how that rolls out, allocation of funding, and so on. But we want a very sharp focus on provision of sufficiency of therapists to enable children to get access to therapists far more quickly than they are. I acknowledge the issue. We've got to try and solve it, and it's built up over a long period of time.
Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Taoiseach, first of all, I will furnish you the details of about that blood test for the 10 months. That's the first thing I will do. Second of all, in relation to services of speech and language, psychology, there is a ferocious deficit at the moment. And what I am asking you, and maybe you didn't pick up on the point, because that if the HSE aren't able to give that service in the area, and parents are willing to drive to somewhere where they can get it for their child, because unfortunately, and I know actually one child near me that has actually regressed over the last 6 to 8 months, and that shouldn't be in relation to autism. They have regressed because of lack of services. And what I am asking you is that those parents would be facilitated where, and I acknowledge that yes, there can be problems at recruiting people, and there can be problems with retention. But at the end of the day, if we do not invest in the future of those children to give them the services, you have a small window of opportunity to help them as best you can. And what I am asking you is that those parents, if the HSE aren't able to do what they're supposed to do, and if those parents were willing to source it somewhere, that they would be paid for it. Thank you.
Funding for the waiting list initiative, there is funding within that envelope for access to private care in the context of long waiting lists in terms of access to therapy services. So, and that was provided for, and maybe the Minister can engage with you in terms of how best to utilise that, or, you know, that provision within the waiting list funding overall. But I think the fundamental response ultimately has to be recruitment and retention on the one level, but also working through the model to make sure it's fit for purpose in respect of responding to the needs of the children in the first instance, because as you said, there is a short window of opportunity, and developmentally it's crucial that those interventions happen early. And families and parents also need to be part of the inputs in terms of the models that get developed. And in my view, parents have not been brought into play early enough when this model was developed originally. I don't think parents were consulted adequately enough.